So the year is 2026, and the dynamic duo of 79-year-old director Steven Spielberg and 94-year-old composer John Williams are teaming up for another buzzworthy film about aliens, which I think is incredible and makes it, I think, one of the most anticipated films of the year. It's a film with obvious relevance with the real-world U.S. government currently releasing classified UFO files. But I think, while much of the discourse and conspiracy theories about UFOs and government cover-ups tend to focus on just the desire for the information to be publicly released, Disclosure Day instead asks what happens when the dog finally catches his tail. What would we actually do with this shocking information? So, with a Hollywood legend directing and a very fascinating concept, can Disclosure Day live up to the hype? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So this is a film that I've just personally been really looking forward to. And I will say right from the start that I did like it quite a bit, although perhaps not quite as much as I had hoped. I think Disclosure Day has plenty of Spielbergian magic and compelling ideas to make for a highly entertaining sci-fi movie, even if it doesn't fully weave its promising ideas together or explore its thematic questions in meaningful enough ways to ever reach its full potential. And without spoiling any major plot points, because I do think the less you know going in, the better, this isn't really a film about aliens. Yes, there are aliens, but they actually play a very minor role on screen, although their presence is felt all throughout. Instead, Disclosure Day is more about humans and the worldview implications for our identity and religion and faith if we were to discover that we are in fact not alone in the universe. This movie is a bit more of a psychological thriller and drama than it is an edge of your seat sci-fi alien flick, and I think it is a very interesting approach, and one that I think adds a greater sense of intellectual or thematic depth than some of Spielberg's previous films in the genre, even if I do think it also exposes perhaps some of his weaknesses as a storyteller. Disclosure Day is an impressive cinematic showcase that, despite being, I said, nearly 80 years old, Spielberg is an all-time great for a reason. The dude just knows how to make a movie. And in this movie, the camera is just constantly in motion and doing interesting things, including some things that I'm not sure I've ever seen before. There's one moment where the camera basically moves around a car and gets into the passenger side seat. And it is super weird and kind of goofy, and I don't know if it entirely works, but it's also just cool to see Spielberg still is experimenting with new ideas. There's also a standout action sequence featuring a moving train that just had me grinning with joy at just the pure cinematic experience and movie magic of it all, and even several other sort of sequences that I found just to be a total delight, kind of capturing the sense of wonder and awe and heart in ways that Spielberg arguably has done better than anyone else over the last 50 years. Unfortunately, like I hinted at earlier, not everything in this film did work for me. I think while Disclosure Day is jam-packed with inventive narrative ideas or striking visuals and thematic questions, the sum is just never greater than the parts. The various intriguing threads are never fully woven together. To me, it's a film that is simply, I think, about too many different things to ever be about any one thing. And at times, it just feels more like a series of pieced together moments and ideas that all relate in some degree to the film's central idea, rather than being a cohesive narrative. I'll say too, rewatchability is not a requirement for a great film. There's plenty of excellent movies that I don't feel the need to ever revisit, but I do think that the rewatchability test might reveal some of the shortcomings of this film. Disclosure Day is very much carried by the intrigue of the mystery and the final revelations, but the actual journey to get there is not always as compelling. I think once you know all the answers and the revelations, I'm not sure how exciting or interesting the questions and character journeys would be. For example, actress Emily Blunt is really fantastic in this film, particularly near the end when she totally carries the story with some really great dramatic and emotional moments. But I don't think the film gives these character moments enough space to breathe. The film kind of asks a lot of captivating questions, but then often rushes to the next exciting car chase sequence before allowing audiences or the on-screen characters time to ponder them. Now, as some of you may have already seen, in like the lead up to this film's release, Spielberg made some very provocative statements about how the film explores the question of God and like, may shake up some Christians. And those claims do prove to be sort of entirely overblown. But Disclosure Day is still one of the most like overtly theological stories in Spielberg's expansive filmography. In fact, there's plenty of like religious imagery and like dialogue that would feel right at home in like a faith-based film released by Wonder or Angel Studios. It actually reminded me of Rian Johnson's Wake Up Dead Man, and not just because both films happen to feature the always great actor Josh O'Connor. And actually, when I interviewed Rian Johnson for that film, he noted that like talking about religion in a so-called secular film is sort of like a third rail, but that faith and like church is so central to the experience of so many people, and he thinks that people actually want to talk about it. And like as a Christian, obviously I totally agree, and Spielberg seemingly does too. And so I was intrigued by the promise of sort of theological dialogue, but the film doesn't really have much to say, or at least as like profound or like shocking implications as it seems to like think it does. I just don't think the implications of like alien life is quite as problematic for like a Christian worldview as the film sort of needs it to be. Whereas Wake Up Dead Man felt like deeply personal since Rian Johnson was raised as a Christian but left the faith as an adult, Disclosure Day comes across more as someone like on the outside of the church projecting how those inside the church might react. Not that Spielberg is like entirely an outsider to religion or spirituality, and I may be totally wrong, but I'm just not sure how many Christians will like see themselves and like resonate with the on-screen struggle the way so many did with Wake Up Dead Man. I do commend like the willingness to tackle questions of faith and religion, but to me it felt more like theological dialogue slapped on to add a sense of like intellectual depth to a sci-fi film rather than like a sci-fi film used to authentically sort of penetrate theological questions. It is interesting at times, but I was just left wanting a bit more. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, there's really not a whole lot. As far as language, there are 2 F words, although one I think is not fully articulated. And then there's like a collection of other profanities, mostly starting with the letter S, as well as like frequent uses of God's name. For violence, really nothing here. You have a character who like stabs the palm of her hand with a sharp object on more than one occasion, which does draw some blood, but nothing overly graphic. And also you have some aliens that like undergo torture, although mostly off screen, although you can hear like their screams. For sexuality, the only thing that stood out to me is you do have like a former nun who remarks to her boyfriend that they have had sex, kind of as an example that she no longer sort of fully follows her religious lifestyle. And the only other kind of content thing is there is a moment where kind of a dialogue where characters talk about how empathy is just like an evolutionary trait. As far as the themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface of this, I think the film's various sort of thematic threads are all connected by questions on the nature of truth, sort of who controls the truth and how do we, or at least should we, respond to receiving the truth. And the influence of like religion in these questions is shown in both like a positive and negative sense. So I am a bit curious to see like how Christian audiences respond. At times, like religious language and like biblical quotations are used to like manipulate or like repress the truth by institutions that believe, that the greater good comes from their authority and power to like steward and like guard people from the truth. On the other hand, like the most like authentically religious characters in this film are the ones who like seem to be the best at navigating the like shocking disclosure of alien life. And when like a woman is being controlled by the leader of the sort of manipulative institution with the help of some wacky alien mind control device, she actually uses like a cross necklace to pierce herself in her palm, kind of allowing the pain to break the connection. And that same necklace kind of recurs all throughout the film, providing some very vivid imagery of someone like somewhat literally clinging to Jesus and the cross as a source of like truth amidst confusing times. And in one scene, that same young woman expresses that while she does question whether Jesus was in fact divine, she still believes that faith and like religion is essential for like the moral order of life and society. She has her doubts, mostly fueled by just the chaotic circumstances, but is seen to like be continually pulled back to God. And after discovering like the truth of alien life, she asks like her religious mentor, "Do you believe that God loves us?" And she wonders whether we can still, be God's prized creation and like have a very special place in his creative order, or merely just one among many. The mentor responds by asking how God's creativity and like power could be contained to just us. To her, the disclosure of alien life does not shake her faith. It merely just affirms her conviction of God's power and glory. And she ultimately says to the younger lady, "You did not lose your faith in God. You lost your faith in people." I think in that way, the film reflects, I think, what C.S. Lewis would call sunshuk, or theologian Blaise Pascal would refer to as like a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man. Just that like, people are innately drawn to worship something greater than ourselves. In fact, there is like a religious bystander at one point that even bows down to Emily Blunt character after she's demonstrated some sort of power, leading Emily Blunt to run away and declare, "I will not be someone's religion." Humans, we are created to worship, and I think Disclosure Day reflects that reality, even as it emphasizes the external forces and circumstances at work to repress or shake or deny the truth. And the film's message is perhaps best encapsulated in the words of Jesus in John 8:32, when he says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Even the last word in this film is listen. I think it's an optimistic message that the truth has the power to set people free. And so the more openly available the truth is, the better. We don't need to control the truth. We merely need to proclaim and listen to it. In the end, Disclosure Day is an entertaining film from one of Hollywood's greatest storytellers, so it is hard to be overly critical, and both me and my 11-year-old son did ultimately enjoy it. But still, much like the overhyped and very under-delivered release of the real-world UFO files, the film failed to meet its perhaps unfairly lofty expectations. I think Disclosure Day is a good film, but I was just hoping for a great one. But hey, I would love to hear what you think, if you, just your thoughts on the way that this film handled the questions of faith and whether or not you believe that we are in fact alone in the universe. So don't be shy, jump into the comment section, let's have a conversation on it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a collider. I got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. We'd love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.